Greetings. Today we delve into the murky waters of human relationships, specifically how the unconscious mind reveals itself when someone close harbors secret hostility toward you. This exploration is not about paranoia or suspicion, but rather understanding the deeper psychological currents that flow beneath the surface of our interactions. The first sign appears in what I call the shadow dance, that intricate interplay between our conscious personality and the rejected, disowned aspects of ourselves that we push into the unconscious. When someone secretly harbors negative feelings toward you, what occurs is a peculiar phenomenon of psychological projection. You see, the shadow does not remain quietly buried. It must express itself somehow, somewhere. In relationships charged with unacknowledged hostility, you may notice an inexplicable intensity in your emotional reactions to this person, a disproportionate irritation, an unexplained anxiety, or even a peculiar fascination. This intensity is the hallmark of projection, for what we most strongly react against in others often reflects disowned elements of our own psyche. Indeed, there exists a mirroring effect in these shadow-laden relationships where unconscious material is exchanged like invisible currency. Pay particular attention to those individuals who consistently evoke powerful emotional responses within you that seem excessive to the circumstance. For there, in that emotional disproportion, lies the shadow's fingerprints. This is not to dismiss genuine antipathy directed toward you, but rather to understand that even legitimate hostility becomes entangled with these projection mechanisms, creating a complex web of conscious and unconscious content. This brings us to the second sign, which emerges from the depths of what I have termed the collective unconscious, that vast reservoir of inherited patterns and primordial images shared by all humanity. Hidden animosity often activates archetypal patterns of enmity that have existed since time immemorial. When interactions with someone consistently evoke feelings of betrayal, abandonment, or persecution that seem strangely ancient and overwhelming, you are likely experiencing the constellation of an archetype. These are not merely personal reactions, but responses embedded in the very structure of the human psyche. Consider how certain relationships might inexplicably cast you into archetypal roles: the betrayed friend, the scapegoat, the outcast, with an emotional power that transcends the immediate situation. The collective unconscious speaks through these patterns, often revealing truths that consciousness has not yet recognized. I have observed in my clinical work that patients frequently report dreams of ancient battles or mythological conflicts when unconscious hostility exists in their close relationships. These archetypal manifestations serve as warnings from the deeper self, signaling that something primal and significant is occurring beneath the civilized veneer of social interaction. The third sign manifests in the contradiction between persona and shadow, between the face someone presents to the world and the energetic reality they emit. The persona, that social mask we all wear, can become particularly rigid and artificial when concealing hostile feelings. You may notice an uncanny discrepancy. Words express warmth while the psychic atmosphere feels cold and withdrawn. Compliments are offered that somehow leave you feeling diminished. Gestures of inclusion paradoxically create distance. This contradiction creates what I would call a psychological dissonance. The conscious mind receives one message while the unconscious registers another entirely. The body and intuition often perceive this discrepancy before the rational mind can articulate it. You might experience inexplicable tension in your shoulders, a tightening in your chest, or a subtle vigilance in their presence. These physical responses are not imagination, but the body's reception of unconscious communication. The psyche, you see, always seeks wholeness and truth, even when consciousness attempts to maintain illusions. This tension between the persona's presentation and the shadow's reality creates a peculiar atmosphere in which nothing seems quite authentic or trustworthy. What makes this sign particularly significant is its persistent nature, not occasional inconsistencies that all humans display, but rather a habitual pattern where the gap between outward behavior and energetic reality never resolves. The fourth sign revealing hidden animosity appears in the realm of dreams, that nightly theater where the unconscious speaks in its native language of symbols. Dreams possess a remarkable honesty that conscious life often lacks, for in sleep, the ego's defenses weaken, allowing the unconscious to communicate directly. Pay particular attention to recurring dream symbols. Figures who pursue, attack, or undermine you may represent actual psychic energy directed toward you. I recall a patient who repeatedly dreamed of a close colleague offering her tea in a cracked cup that leaked while smiling pleasantly. This simple yet potent image captured the essence of a relationship where nourishment was offered in a form designed to fail. The unconscious rarely dissembles about emotional currents. Rather, it presents them with a symbolic clarity that can be startling when properly understood. Dreams where familiar faces transform into threatening forms are especially significant. Perhaps a friend's countenance suddenly shifts into a predatory animal, or a trusted figure leads you into dangerous terrain. These transformations reveal the psyche's perception of the relationship's true nature beneath its social veneer. I have observed that these dream figures often carry both personal and archetypal dimensions, suggesting that what appears as personal animosity may connect to deeper, collective patterns of human relationship. The dream speaks not to frighten, but to integrate, to bring into consciousness what has been operating in shadow so that genuine relationship becomes possible. This leads us to the fifth sign, which manifests through the complex mechanism of Anima and Animus projections. These contrasexual archetypes, the feminine soul image in man and the masculine spirit image in woman, profoundly influence how we perceive others, particularly in close relationships. When someone consistently misperceives your fundamental nature due to Anima or Animus projections, unconscious hostility toward your authentic being may be present. You might notice that this person interacts not with you, but with a fantasy they have constructed, attributing to you motivations, characteristics, or intentions that feel alien to your self-understanding. This projection creates a peculiar form of invisibility. Your actual self remains unseen while a projected image takes your place in the relationship. The hostility lies precisely in this refusal, often unconscious, to acknowledge your authentic being. I have observed this phenomenon frequently in marriages, where partners become carriers of each other's anima or animus, creating relationships with phantoms rather than real people. The tragedy is that both parties suffer in this arrangement. One remains unseen while the other relates to an illusion. This projection becomes particularly destructive when the projected image carries negative aspects of the anima or animus, the femme fatale, the destructive mother, the tyrannical father, the trickster lover. When someone persistently sees you through these archetypal lenses, despite evidence to the contrary, their unconscious is revealing a hostility toward genuine relationship, preferring the fantasy to the reality of your individual existence. The sixth sign emerges through that remarkable phenomenon I have called synchronicity, meaningful coincidences that transcend conventional causality. These are causal connections between psychic states and external events, form a language through which the collective unconscious communicates. In relationships harboring hidden animosity, synchronicities often manifest as patterns that consistently create distance or conflict between you and another person. Perhaps every meeting is mysteriously interrupted, plans repeatedly fall through for seemingly unrelated reasons, or communication is consistently misunderstood despite clear expression. One might dismiss each incident as mere chance, yet their persistent pattern suggests a deeper significance. I recall a patient who noted that whenever she attempted to collaborate with a particular colleague, unexpected obstacles would arise. Documents would go missing, schedules would conflict, or third parties would intervene with urgent matters. These synchronistic patterns reflected the unconscious reality of their relationship, a resistance to genuine connection that neither party had fully acknowledged. Synchronicity serves as a bridge between the inner and outer worlds, manifesting psychic realities in material circumstances. When these meaningful coincidences consistently undermine relationship, they suggest that unconscious intentions are creating visible patterns in the physical world. The collective unconscious speaks through these events, often revealing truths that consciousness has not yet recognized or accepted. I have found that attending to synchronistic patterns offers profound insight into relationships, particularly those where the conscious presentation contradicts the unconscious reality. The seventh sign emerges through the activation of mythological motifs in your relationship dynamics. Mythology, you see, is not mere primitive storytelling, but the collective dream of humanity, expressing psychological truths that transcend time and culture. When hidden animosity exists, ancient patterns of enmity often constellate in modern form. Consider whether your dynamic parallels archetypal stories of concealed adversaries, Loki's seemingly friendly betrayals in Norse mythology, where the trickster god would join the Aesir in their feasts while simultaneously plotting their downfall, or Judas' kiss in the Christian tradition, using the very symbol of affection to mark his target, or Set's murder of Osiris while disguised as a friend in Egyptian mythology. These are not merely interesting parallels, but psychic patterns that repeat themselves throughout human history because they reflect fundamental structures of the collective unconscious. I have observed in my analytical practice that relationships charged with unconscious hostility often recreate these mythological scenarios with remarkable precision, though the participants remain unaware of the script they are following. A patient once described a friendship that seemed supportive on the surface, yet consistently undermined her most meaningful endeavors. She was living the Loki-Thor dynamic without recognizing it. The collective unconscious speaks through these mythological motifs, using them as templates for human interaction. When you sense yourself caught in such an archetypal drama, pay attention, for mythology reveals psychological truths that rational analysis alone cannot access. These patterns transcend Eastern and Western traditions alike. The Buddha's cousin Devadatta, who attempted to usurp his position while maintaining outward reverence, reflects the same archetypal dynamic as Iago's betrayal of Othello while posing as his loyal friend. The eighth sign appears through what the alchemists termed Nigredo, the blackening phase of transformation. Alchemy, far from being merely a primitive precursor to chemistry, was a profound system of psychological symbolism, projecting the inner process of individuation onto chemical substances and procedures. In relationships harboring secret animosity, alchemical Nigredo manifests when interactions consistently leave you feeling diminished rather than enriched, psychologically depleted, confused, or strangely reduced. The alchemists spoke of putrefaction and mortification during this phase, Psychologically, this corresponds to experiences where your vital energy seems to decay after encounters with certain individuals. Just as lead was considered the base metal in alchemy, these interactions create psychological lead in your system. A heaviness, a dullness, a sense of being devalued. I recall working with a businessman whose meetings with a particular partner always left him inexplicably fatigued and doubtful, despite their apparent productivity. This energetic depletion was the hallmark of Nigredo, unconscious hostility creating psychological lead instead of gold in their interactions. The Chinese Taoists expressed a similar understanding in their concept of energy exchange between beings. When qi is siphoned rather than shared, one partner gains vitality at the other's expense. This alchemical perspective reveals that the most dangerous form of hostility may not be expressed in dramatic confrontation, but in subtle, energetic exchange. Of the gradual transformation of psychological gold into lead through repeated interaction. The body registers this transformation before the mind comprehends it. Pay attention to consistent patterns of exhaustion, confusion, or depletion following encounters with specific individuals. The ninth sign brings us to a crucial juncture in our exploration: the necessity of distinguishing genuine animosity from our own projected content as part of the individuation journey. Individuation, that process of psychological development toward wholeness, demands rigorous honesty about the origins of our perceptions. Are we accurately sensing hostility directed toward us, or are we projecting our own unconscious material onto others? This discrimination requires what I have called active imagination, a conscious dialogue with unconscious content that allows for greater clarity and integration. When suspecting hidden animosity, one must carefully examine one's own shadow. Material. Do you harbor unacknowledged hostility toward this person? Have you recognized your own capacity for the very behaviors you perceive in them? The Eastern traditions, particularly Advaita Vedanta, express this truth in the concept of the mirror. Others reflect aspects of ourselves that we have not fully integrated. This is not to dismiss genuine perception, but to refine it through honest self-examination. I have observed that psychological types play a significant role in this process. Introverted intuitive types may perceive hostility that extroverted sensing types miss entirely, while thinking types may rationalize emotional undercurrents that feeling types immediately register. The differing cognitive functions create different relationships to unconscious content. True psychological growth requires developing the inferior function, that least developed aspect of personality, to achieve more balanced perception. The individuation process demands this complexity of understanding, learning to recognize when we contribute to interpersonal darkness versus when we accurately perceive it. The self, that central archetype of wholeness, guides this discrimination, often through dreams that reveal blind spots in our perception or confirm intuitive knowledge that the ego struggles to accept. The 10th sign guides us toward what I have, termed the Transcendent Function, that mysterious process whereby the tension of opposites generates a third position that transcends both. What appears as hatred often serves this transcendent function, creating the necessary friction for psychological growth. The tension between conscious friendliness and unconscious hostility contains transformative potential for both parties involved. I am reminded of the ancient Hermetic axiom, as above, so below, as within, so without. The outer conflict mirrors an inner division seeking resolution. Rather than merely identifying hostility to avoid it, the path of individuation requires us to engage with this tension creatively. The transcendent function emerges not through intellectual understanding alone, but through living engagement with the full spectrum of relationship, including its shadow aspects. Jung, the man, has experienced this process painfully in my own life, particularly in my complex relationship with Freud, where mutual unconscious hostility eventually served as catalyst for the development of analytical psychology itself. The symbolic death of our friendship enabled a rebirth of understanding that neither could have achieved alone. This alchemical perspective sees relationship difficulties not as failures, but as crucibles of transformation. The Chinese concept of wu-wei, non-contending action, offers wisdom here. By neither denying the tension nor becoming identified with it, we allow the transcendent function to operate organically. The psyche moves naturally toward wholeness when we neither suppress its contradictions nor become consumed by them. When you sense hidden animosity, consider what new development, what integration, what consciousness might be struggling to emerge through this difficult dynamic. The mandala often appears in dreams during such periods. That sacred circle representing the wholeness that contains and reconciles all opposites, including love and hate. The 11th sign extends our exploration beyond personal psychology into cultural and collective dimensions of shadow projection. Our cultural complexes often determine who becomes the container for our collective shadow material. The analytical psychologist must consider not only individual dynamics, but also the archetypal patterns constellated within social groups. A person from a demographic associated with negative cultural projections may become the recipient of unconscious hostility that has little to do with their individual qualities. I observed this phenomenon extensively during the catastrophic events in Germany in my lifetime, where an entire people became the vessel for the European shadow. On a smaller scale, within families or organizations, certain members often become carriers of the collective shadow, the difficult one, the troublemaker, the sensitive one, regardless of their actual behavior. Understanding cultural archetypes helps identify when someone's apparent hatred reflects broader societal patterns rather than purely personal dynamics. The African tradition of Ubuntu, I am because we are, recognizes this interconnectedness of individual and collective psychology that Western thinking often neglects. In modern organizational life, I have noted that when someone is consistently scapegoated across different contexts, we must look to archetypal patterns rather than merely personal factors. The Greek pharmakos tradition, where a designated individual carried the community's sins and was cast out to restore harmony, continues unconsciously in modern institutions. Recognizing these collective dimensions does not absolve individuals of responsibility, but places personal interactions within their broader archetypal context. The individuation process requires not only personal shadow integration, but also conscious relationship with these collective patterns. The Tibetan Buddhist practice of Tonglen, taking in suffering and sending out compassion, offers a spiritual approach to this psychological reality, transforming projected negativity rather than merely deflecting it. The 12th sign leads us to the culmination of our exploration, the Coniunctio Oppositorum, the union of opposites that transcends the binary of love and hate. The goal of analytical psychology is not the identification and avoidance of enemies, but the achievement of wholeness through the integration of opposing forces. True psychological maturity recognizes that authentic relationship contains both love and hate, consciously held and transformed through the circular process of development. The medieval alchemists symbolized this union in the rebis, the hermaphroditic, being representing the marriage of opposing principles. This symbolic image points toward a psychological truth: integration, rather than elimination of contradiction, leads to wholeness. I have observed in long-term relationships, marriages, deep friendships, analytical relationships, that their depth and authenticity depend on the conscious acceptance of both positive and negative feelings. The capacity to say, "I can hold both my love and my anger toward you," marks psychological maturity. The Hindu deity Shiva Shakti, simultaneously masculine and feminine, destructive and creative, embodies this integration that Western thinking struggles to achieve, with its emphasis on logical non-contradiction. The quaternary structure of the psyche that appears repeatedly in dreams and mandalas, those sacred circles divided into 4 sections, suggests that wholeness requires the integration of all 4 functions: thinking, feeling, sensation, and intuition. Similarly, complete relationship requires the integration of positive and negative aspects into a higher unity. When hidden hostility is brought into consciousness, transformed but not eliminated, relationship achieves a depth and authenticity impossible when only positive feelings are acknowledged. The circular nature of psychological development means that this integration is never achieved once and for all, but continually renewed through conscious engagement with the full spectrum of human emotion. As we conclude this exploration of the signs revealing hidden animosity, we must remember that the ultimate purpose of such recognition is not suspicion or self-protection, but the expansion of consciousness that leads to genuine relationship. The individuation process, that journey toward psychological wholeness, requires us to encounter and integrate all aspects of human connection, including its shadow elements. What begins as the uncomfortable recognition of hostility can transform into the precious gift of authenticity when approached with consciousness and compassion. The ancient Gnostics understood that enlightenment comes not from avoiding darkness, but from bringing light into it. Similarly, relationship achieves its highest potential not through the absence of negative feelings, but through their conscious integration. The mandala that appears so frequently in the dreams of modern individuals seeking wholeness offers us wisdom here, a sacred circle encompassing all opposites, centered on the self. This central archetype of wholeness guides the individuation process, drawing us toward the integration that transcends binary thinking. Love and hate, like all opposites, are ultimately complementary aspects of a greater unity. The secret of the golden flower, that ancient Chinese text on meditation, teaches that light is found within darkness itself, not separate from it. So, too, in our relationships, the path to genuine connection leads through the honest recognition of all that exists between us, both the light and the shadow. This journey is not linear but circular, not logical but symbolic, not intellectual but lived. As we develop consciousness of these dynamics, we move toward what I have called the self, that organizing center of the total personality that embraces all opposites in a transcendent unity. In recognizing the signs of hidden animosity, we take one step on the endless spiral of individuation, the great work that continues throughout a lifetime of conscious relationship with both the inner and outer worlds.